Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Paris Schutz has the evening off. On the show tonight, after more than 20 years in office, Secretary of State Jesse White is retiring. Tonight, we hear from the two Republican candidates vying for his job.
We could have left, but we figured our work wasn't done yet.
Teaching farming and healthy lifestyles at an urban oasis in Fuller Park. We have a live report. A tornado and extreme heat. We break down this week's extreme weather with an atmospheric scientist. Chicago's facing a lifeguard shortage. How the Park District is upping its recruiting game.
I don't want this show to be a black show. This is an American show.
Commemorating more than 400 years of Black American history in the new musical 1619, The Journey of a People.
And Brandis, as you mentioned, I'm in Fuller Park as part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. Now, despite being considered one of the smallest and poorest neighborhoods in Chicago, it's hoping to prosper with investments from community leaders. Now, we speak with those residents and those leaders working to make a difference. But first, I send it back to you.
Joanna, thanks. We'll see you soon. And now to some of today's top stories. Former President Donald Trump is alleged to have repeatedly pressured Vice President Mike Pence to illegally overturn the 2020 election results. According to some Pence aides testifying today before the congressional committee investigating the January 6th attack, Trump pushed Pence to overturn the result despite being told that such action would have violated the Constitution.
The Vice President's first instinct was that there was no way that any one person, particularly the Vice President, who is on the ticket and has a vested outcome in the election, could possibly have the authority to decide it by rejecting electors or to decisively alter the outcome by suspending the joint session for the first time in history in order to try to get a different outcome from state legislatures.
Separately, the former president announced that he'll be holding a Save America rally in Minden, Illinois later this month. Trump will be at the Adams County Fairgrounds on June 25th to support Congresswoman Mary Miller, who faces Congressman Rodney Davis in the Republican primary for the newly drawn 15th district. Chicago police officers found to have committed misconduct face inconsistent and unfair discipline. That's according to an audit released today by the city's Office of Inspector General. Officers accused of misconduct are typically investigated by the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, known as COPA, or the Bureau of Internal Affairs. The Chicago Police Board determines the ultimate punishment in serious cases of misconduct and when the superintendent disagrees with COPA's recommended punishment. However, Inspector General Deborah Witzberg calls the disciplinary process unpredictable for involved members and risks arbitrary outcomes. Walgreens customers may soon be asked to participate in a clinical drug trial. The Deerfield-based pharmacy chain announced today it's launching a new clinical trials business. It aims to mine the vast array of consumer and patient data it holds to match customers with pharmaceutical companies for drug trials. Walgreens says it'll enable pharmaceutical companies to get more diverse participation in clinical trials, since currently participants in clinical trials are disproportionately white. Up next, Amanda Vinicky sits down with the two Republican candidates vying to become Illinois Secretary of State. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
For the first time in 23 years, there will be a new Secretary of State in Illinois come November. Democrat Jesse White has been in office and often the top vote getter of anyone on the Illinois ballot since 1999. His retirement has a lot of candidates eager to take over, including the two Republicans with us tonight. Joining us are Illinois State Representative Dan Brady. He's also a funeral director and former coroner. Also, former local and federal prosecutor John Milhiser. Since his term as U.S. Attorney for the Central District of Illinois ended last year, he has taken up teaching. Now, thanks to both of you for being with us tonight. Let's start with you.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, thanks. Mr. Milhiser, now you as well as Representative Brady have both talked about updating motor vehicle centers. These are sometimes referred to as DMVs. I want to know specifically How would you update them?
Right. Well, first off, Amanda, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And, you know, I'm running because the people of Illinois deserve good government and leaders they can trust. And when you look at state government in Illinois, one of the few officials that people actually trusted was Jesse White. And he's leaving. So it's so important that the next Secretary of State be a public servant and somebody that people can trust and continue to move that office forward. I was very fortunate over the years to work very closely with Jesse White's office. And one thing we can do, you mentioned modernizing the technology in the office, and that's to make sure that people can get the services they need quickly, efficiently, effectively, and safely.
How?
Well, I think one is modernizing the office technology-wise. So when you go online, you can get the services you need, a streamlined process, so you can find out what you need online. That's what we need. It's a customer service agency, but it's not just the DMV. There are 21 different departments, 4,000 employees. The office needs a public servant, not a career politician. That's why it's so important that the next Secretary of State is somebody who can go in and do the job day one.
I'm going to pose that same question to you, Representative Brady, because it's something you've also talked about. I will say I made an appointment the last time I had to renew my driver's license. It was all right when I got there, but kind of confusing to do. What would you do to update either DMVs or the website for the Secretary of State's office?
Well, thanks again, Amanda. It's nice to be with you. And first off, when you talk about the Secretary of State's office, this is a constitutional office that touches more lives on a daily basis of Illinois residents than any other in constitutional government of our state. One of the first things would be, when you talk about the motor vehicle divisions, is they haven't been fully staffed in years. And you have to start with that. We also have to start with cross-training of those employees, so the employees know other operations of that office. So when you come in, you don't get told, I don't know, you need that, she's not here today, he's not here today, come back later. That's one area specific we can move into. And it's the largest office that touches more lives than any other and responsible for so many things other than driver services. However, that's what touches most people's lives. That's one of the areas we'd start modernizing, digital, all other areas when it comes to technology, all while we protect people's personal identity and remembering especially maybe those who aren't so technology savvy.
So come to that, it is 2022. Would you move to, yes or no here, digitize vehicle titles?
I don't think so without digital titles. I thought you were talking license, my apologies. I definitely moved to digital titles. Number one, we would do that just like e-titling that Florida does. Right now, whether it's trucks, whether it's cars, we have a problem. I've been talking to automobile dealers, truck associations, and those particular titles sit in boxes in some cases, taking weeks upon weeks, if not longer. We could e-title those services and move those services to the lien holders where those titles belong, and it stops stymieing government.
Driver's licenses.
Yes.
You would also move to digitize
we'd
those?
certainly look at digital driver's licenses. Those are something that still needs to be, I think, thoroughly vetted a little bit more.
How about you, Mr. Milheiser, on each of those titles, vehicle titles?
For sure, titles. I've talked to automobile dealers, and what they have to do is they have to walk those like actual papers there, which doesn't make any sense. We need to update the office so they can just scan that in, and those can be delivered.
What about driver's licenses?
I think if we can do it safely, we need to look at that. And there's other things we can do as long as we can do them safely. And the whole point of updating technology is to make lives of Illinois citizens better and easier. And again, as Dan points out, this is the office that touches more people in Illinois than any other office. It is in all 102 counties. So we need to make sure those services are provided at a high level, but we need to make sure they're safely provided at a high level.
So what was your last experience going to renew your driver's license?
Well, I mean, I will tell you this. So when I moved to Illinois 28 years ago to go to law school at the University of Illinois, and when I first came here, I went to the DMV to get a driver's license. The office looks incredibly similar now as it did 28 years ago. So we need to update that in-person experience, but also update the online experience. And I want to touch on something real quick that Dan said when he talks about bringing more staff into the office. I think if we update technology, and we might be able to reduce the staff in the office. I don't think government should be immune from downsizing to save taxpayer dollars. There's a big budget in the Secretary of State's office. I think day one I would go in and audit that office to see what they're doing well, what they're not doing well, and find ways to save taxpayers money. Reduce the fees. The fees are incredible. They're way too high.
What fees?
Well, the fees for trailer fees, for car fees, for license fees. When you look at the states around us.
Those fees pay for infrastructure, though.
Yeah, they do. But I think if we look at different ways to fund that, and why are the states around us so much lower? Why are we the highest? we need to look at that. There's ways we can save money. And as Secretary of State, I will work with the folks at the Capitol to save taxpayers money.
Representative Brady, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, man, and one of the things that we talked about when in the legislature, we talk about fees. We did reduce the trailer fees after it was passed, and we've moved those fees back. We could do more of that. But talk about the services in the Secretary of State's office. I said this office touches more lives, daily lives, than any other office. The area they do that in is driver services. We should prioritize those driver services, and that means we have to have staff there. Over 4,000 people in the Secretary of State's office. We can figure out ways to get more people into those facilities to serve the taxpayers who are paying taxes for services they're not getting.
Any quick experiences on your part, a story you want to tell?
I've been through
horror story or positive one?
Well, you know what? I will say this. My son Tom, who just turned 21, he just got a renewal process, and we're looking at that online, making some improvements there. John and I have been talking about some of these things, and maybe some folks will listen a little bit, and that's great. But I'll tell you that the service itself, we have to remember, those employees also, that's a tough spot on a daily basis when things aren't actually, going maybe as streamlined as possible. So we have to keep that consideration. We have to also look at those offices, and that's one of the things that I've done as representative when I've sat on the committee for budgets for the Secretary of State's office. I like to talk to the employees. They have some very good ideas on how they can streamline, how they can improve, because they're the front lines.
Well, I want to move to
real quick, just as far as the offices around the state. Again, this is an office that is in all 102 counties. So as I travel around during the campaign, and Dan might have seen this too, some people love their DMV. Like I went to Bond County, and they're like, we have a great DMV. I go in, I know the folks there, I get in and out quickly. I go to other counties, and they have to wait hours. So we have to make sure there's uniform efficiency in all of the DMVs.
A different experience, perhaps, in some of the more populated areas of the state versus rural ones.
Right. So we just have to make sure that it's uniform, and those services are provided efficiently and effectively to everyone in Illinois.
And Amanda, remember this also, when we talk about across the state of Illinois in 102 counties, there's 96 facilities roughly. All those facilities almost do something different or have different majority responsibilities that operate. And so how we can look at that, streamline those, is very, very important. And the Secretary of State's office owns 3 of those facilities themselves. We spend almost over $10 million in leases alone that I think both my opponent and I would like to take a serious look at what's going on there.
So speaking of how things are going now, what grade would you give? We'll start with you, Mr. Millhiser, actually. What grade would you give Secretary of State White?
I have worked closely over the years with Secretary White's office, and I think he and his staff have done a good job on a number of issues, on reducing traffic fatalities, on looking at distracted driving, on reducing DUI deaths. Again, I work closely, but there's things we can improve technology-wise. And if you're forcing me to give him a grade, let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd give him an 8. But I'm a solid 8, but I'm a tough grader. And you can ask my students this past year. So I'm a tough grader, but I
might take you up on that. How about you,
he's done a good job. I mean, we need to continue the work he's done in the office. And I'll tell you real quick, one thing I think he's done extremely well is reach out to the youth, and what he does for the youth across the state. We need to continue that, because
we all know those tumblers,
they're the future, not just them, but in every county. We need to reach out to those youth. And I saw it more than ever teaching. Coming back from COVID, these kids are beaten down. We need to lift them up and support them. And it's a whole of government approach, incling the Secretary of State's office.
Representative Brady, grade.
I would give Secretary White a thumbs up. There's
thumbs
nobody
up.
that works any harder. I'm not a teacher, so I won't get into grades, but I would just simply say that I give him a thumbs up. He's a very dedicated public servant. But the office has slipped over the years. There's no doubt about that, and we've seen it in a variety of areas. But I'd also say there's nobody at 87 years old that can tumble better than Jesse White.
Heck, I can't tumble now, and I'm nowhere near that. Getting closer. All right, let's move on to another role. Roles of Secretary of States, of course, vary across the nation. And in Illinois, that role, when it comes to elections, is really quite limited. But the Secretary of State does oversee what has really been a ceremonial vote of the Electoral College members in Illinois as they vote in presidential elections. So we know today's hearings, of course, have exposed that some unprecedented things have gone on in their country. These are unusual times. If you had been in the role of Secretary of State, Mr. Millhiser, and under pressure from Republican President Donald Trump to use that role to keep him in the presidency in 2020, what would you have done?
I would not have. Well, let me answer this way. So as U.S. Attorney for the 46 counties in the Central District of Illinois, I did not see any fraud to the extent that would have changed the election in the 46 counties. It's the job of the Secretary of State in Illinois, different than other states. as you pointed out, some are the election official. In Illinois, it's up to each individual county. So we have 102 election officials. Each county clerk, it's up to them to make sure that we have free and fair elections. And I'm sure my opponent and I would agree that we need to have free and fair elections. We need to make sure that everyone who has the ability to vote can vote, and all those votes need to be counted.
So you would have carried it out as it
Yes.
occurred. How about you, Representative Brady?
Well, certainly with the Secretary of State's office, it does have a limited role, but under federal law of motor voter, we register people to vote.
Yes.
I think one of the things we could do to protect election integrity is not only what you're getting right now in a digital signature from your driver's license to those election authorities, whether they're the clerks, whether they're the city election commissions across the state, it's all different. But we could do it digital. We could actually get to a point where a picture off a driver's license or an ID card, just like goes on your FOID card on a renewal, could actually be digital in front of that election judge instead of trying to compare signatures, can actually see who's standing in front of him. That's one of the things we do. And as far as any type of evidence goes, the Secretary of State certifies the elections, but it's really done, as you said,
Correct.
from all the local election authorities, and that's where the counting actually
But you would not
goes.
have interfered when there's the ceremony often held in the state Senate chambers where the Secretary of State presides when the Electoral College meets.
I would listen to all the local election authorities, and if they showed me proof that there's something we need to take a look at, we'd take a strong look at it.
And, you sort of got to the 2017 law, automatic voter registration, signed by former Governor Bruce Rauner, and that's when you renew your license, automatically have an opportunity to be registered to vote. Advocates say, however, that it is still not working as intended. So, Mr. Millhiser, would you work to further streamline that process?
Again, we need to make sure that everybody who is eligible to vote gets to vote, and those votes count, and we need to have free and fair elections.
I feel like you sort of already answered that one.
Well, we do, but one of my first pieces of legislation was electronic filing of birth and death records in the state of Illinois. To date, the Secretary of State's office, the State Board of Elections, and other clerks and election authorities have the ability to utilize that, and I think it needs to be utilized more, especially in the Secretary of State's office when it comes to driver's license individuals who are deceased, to purge those voter rolls and make sure on those voter rolls who's actually on and who's not supposed to be.
Should Illinois pre-register to vote 16 and 17-year-olds so that they're automatically registered when they turn 18?
I don't know about pre-registration until we can make sure when it was rolled out, as vote by mail was, from the Secretary of State's office, it was not a very well organized or planned situation. Any clerk will probably tell you that across the state of Illinois. I will tell you this, though, in the legislation that I proposed and was signed into law, 16 and 17-year-olds can be organ donation candidates potentially on the registry, and there's a parent opt-out.
Something under the auspices of the Secretary of State's office. Now, Mr. Millhiser, you have talked about wanting to clear the roads more of intoxicated drivers, distracted drivers. Does Illinois, as a former prosecutor, need to impose any further penalties for drunk driving?
We have penalties on the books. We just make sure they're enforced by the state's attorneys in all those 102 counties. I worked over the years very closely with the Secretary of State's office. I called people from the Secretary of State's office to testify in court in DUI cases. As Secretary of State, I will work closely with those state's attorneys, with law enforcement in each of the counties to make sure they have what they need from us to enforce the laws. And we look at DUIs. Jesse White's office has done a good job, and we need to work with law enforcement, both local, state, and federal, to make sure we keep our roads safe. When you look at something that's come up in the last couple of years, distracted driving, incredibly dangerous. As somebody who has 2 daughters, that's something I worry about every day as they go out and they drive. So we need to make sure we continue to educate the public on the dangers of distracted driving and give counties the assistance they need. Because as I found over the years, partnerships are key to keeping our roads safe. Right, community partners and law enforcement partnerships are key to keeping the road safe and also keeping our communities safe.
So speaking of law enforcement, persons with disabilities say that frequently drivers either are using false placards or are illegally parking in spots designed for accessibility reasons, but that there is infrequent enforcement, including by the Secretary of State's office on that. What, if anything, would you do to enforce this? Representative Brady.
Well, first off, the Secretary of State's office has its own police force. It now, thanks to the General Assembly, has a particular task force that is utilized by the Secretary of State's office, specifically looking at the placards and the problems in individuals that are not supposed to have those type of placards. But it all starts at the Secretary of State's office from an organization side of things. However, the enforcement is extremely important. And with local enforcement, most of the times at Secretary of State police, you're going to see this over holidays or large parking area.
These sort of sting operations.
So those operations, yes, you call them stings, you can call them other operations, but combined with local law enforcement is one approach. But the other approach is taking that 100 roughly sworn officers division, and making sure that we're focusing on those areas that seems to have a bigger complaint section. And they now have, thanks to the General Assembly, the ability to do more of that. And I'm talking with the Secretary of State's police about that, and they're very, very, very proactive.
Briefly, anything you want to add?
Well, again, partnerships are key. I've worked closely with the Secretary of State Police Department over the years, and as State's Attorney, created partnerships in Sangamon County to make our streets safe and our community safe. As U.S. Attorney, operating in 46 counties, work with each of those counties, work with the communities within those counties to form partnerships and to find out what are the issues they're dealing with, whether it be violent crime, whether it be corruption, and work together. And the Secretary of State Police Department can do more with regard to partnerships.
So speaking of violent
Illinois.
crime, what about carjackings? That is a major fear. Is there a role that the Secretary of State's office can play?
Oh, 100%. And we talk about partnerships. We can partner with law enforcement across the state and help them do their job. Assist them in identifying carjackers and enforcing the law with regard to carjackers. And those state's attorneys in those individual counties who have to prosecute those cases, make sure they have everything they need from us to do their job to keep our streets safe.
Now, I believe we have very limited time left, so I'm going to just end on a fun one. What was your first car?
It was an Acura Integra that we bought used in Nashville. So my dad was in the military. We moved all around the country. I lived in Tullahoma, Tennessee. And my first car was an Acura Integra.
How about you, Representative Brady?
Amanda, I'd like to go back to a lot of the things we just talked about.
We've got
in
a lot
my
of ground to
experience
cover.
and what I've done. But to answer your question specifically, it was a 1973 Caprice Classic convertible.
All right. Well, thank you. And with that, I know we have a lot more to talk about because the Secretary of State's office is responsible for so much. Primary voting already underway. We thank you so very much for joining us, Representative Dan Brady, and also former prosecutor John Milhiser. We appreciate your time here.
Amanda, thank you very much. Dan,
Thank
good
you,
to see you again.
Nice
Thanks.
to see you.
And don't forget, you can check out our 2022 voter guide to hear more from these candidates and others on why they want your vote. It's at WTTW.com/voter guide. We're back with more Chicago Tonight in just a moment, but first, a look at our upcoming candidate forums.
Fuller Park is a small community on the south side of Chicago, right off the Dan Ryan Expressway. Even though the population is less than 4,000 people, community leaders have been investing in the neighborhood for years. As part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series, reporter Joanna Hernandez and producer Acacio Hernandez spent the day exploring Fuller Park. Joanna joins us to talk about what they found. And Joanna, it looks like you found a garden.
I did, and can you believe this used to be an illegal dump site? Just take a look at it now. It's now called the Eden Place Nature Center, and it is quite beautiful in here. Walking in here, you almost forget we're still in the city. It's a beautiful breeze out here. You can hear the birds. And now founder Michael Howard and his wife Amelia Howard have dedicated years of their lives to educating and providing services to the neighborhood. They run the nonprofit Eden Place Nature Center, where they teach youth to farm and connect with the environment by providing the community a safe place to learn.
Our mission is to help improve the quality of life for all of our neighbors. We've helped with mortgage foreclosures. We've helped people get mortgages. We do financial literacy. We ran one of the city's longest job training programs, teaching construction job skills training program to guys right off the street.
They have multiple programs they operate, and they're getting ready to open the Nature Center back up. They do share the pandemic was quite hard, and they had to use their savings to help support the families here. We're told that about 10,000 people have passed through here.
I have to maintain a good, positive perspective because a lot of people don't have the same resources I have. I have an education, I have a skill bank that could put me in six figures if I decided to take a job elsewhere. But my wife and I chose to be here to help other folks get to where we could have left years ago. When they firebombed my house in 2000, we could have left, but we figured our work wasn't done yet.
As you mentioned, the population is less than 4,000 people. Most of the people living here are African American, but Latinos are slowly moving in. The reality is most families make a median household income of less than $25,000 a year. A local resident we spoke to says the community is often overlooked when it comes down to federal funding. She also mentioned the lack of businesses and restaurants this area has. There are about 2 to 3 local restaurants in the community.
I would rather put money back in my own community than to drive somewhere else. Most time you have to drive 100 or something to go get something decent. So the few places we have here, we try to keep.
The Southside Community Federal Credit Union is one of 2 minority-owned nonprofit financial institutions in Illinois. Southside resident and CEO Greg Brown says his goal is to provide residents on the Southside financial tools to own a home, help with saving plans, and give people opportunities to own businesses here in the area.
For most businesses in this community, because you're targeting a population that has a high poverty rate, high unemployment rate, the incomes are very low, so it's very difficult for businesses to compete in today's market. However, I mean, we can change all of that, and that's what I'm dedicating my life to, is seeing how I can be an agent for change to spur for what we really need is an economic movement.
The neighborhood is also home to many churches. We headed to Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church on Princeton Avenue to speak with Lamont Watson. He is chief of staff and has been a member since he was 12 years old. Something interesting he shared is the church started its television ministry in the mid-70s, and it has reached hundreds of homes across the city.
It's about saving souls. That's the ultimate goal, but it's about meeting needs first. And that's something that, that's one of the visions of our pastor, meeting needs.
The church also runs a pantry every Wednesday, and they're hoping early next month to open back up their soup kitchen that's hosted in the basement every Thursday.
Even during the pandemic, we had our food giveaway, where we actually, since we couldn't come in the building and we had all the COVID, rules and regulations, we set up out on our parking lot. And so, and it was big, where cars they could just drive up, give them a box of food and everything. So it was really not just for the Fuller Park community, but it really helped out a lot of families as well.
Even though this neighborhood lacks investment and is underserved, there are people who are investing their time to uplift this community. People like Howard, who believe helping people obtain knowledge would lead to greater change.
When we can see that we have caused a ripple in people's families, where their lives have improved, where they now have a higher knowledge of environmental hazards that they can protect their families from, and they also have a better quality of life because we take them camping, we take them fishing, we take them canoeing, we take them on hikes in parts of the country that they probably would never have been before.
And this center also used to have animals before the pandemic, and they're hoping to bring them back with the help of donations. You can actually see there's also a butterfly sanctuary right there, really quite beautiful. You can see some butterflies right now, so it's a really nice, calm place here. And coming up, we speak with the alderman in the area. But first, I send it back to you, Brandis.
You've got a nice warm day for it as well, Joanna. We'll see you in a little bit. Thank you. Also to come on Chicago Tonight, the Chicago Park District is upping its incentives to help combat a lifeguard shortage. We'll tell you what they are. All in a week's span, a tornado and then excessive heat. Breaking down this week's extreme weather with an atmospheric scientist. And why Black history is American history, as explored in a new musical heading to Westtown this weekend only. But first, some more of today's top stories. The city of Chicago has received an upfront payment of $40 million from casino developer Bally's. A statement from the mayor's office says the money will go entirely to the city's annual pension contribution. But a new report also highlights the downside of gaming expansion. An Illinois Department of Human Services report released today says that 3.8% of Illinoisans, that's more than 380,000 people, have a gambling problem. It said that another 760,000 people in the state are at risk of developing a problem. IDHS says 68% of all adults in the state reported gambling last year. It said the most popular form of gambling is the state lottery. Cook County Jail reportedly has the highest voter turnout of all early voting sites in the city. Chicago Votes is a nonpartisan nonprofit that pushed for state legislation to allow people in jail to vote. That law came into effect in 2020. They say that of the 479 ballots cast in the 24th ward as of Tuesday, 338 were cast at Cook County Jail. Jen Dean, co-executive director at Chicago Votes, calls this, quote, a dream come true for voter participation at the intersection of democracy and the American legal system. Revenue from film production in Illinois is projected to have hit a record high last year. According to a statement released by Mayor Lightfoot and Governor Pritzker, projected revenue for film production in the state reached $630 million in 2021, surpassing pre-pandemic numbers from 2019 by $70 million. And McDonald's has agreed to pay a $1.3 billion fine in France to settle allegations of dodging taxes. The Chicago-based company has been accused by French authorities of unfairly reporting revenue in Luxembourg and Switzerland that had actually been earned in France. The fine is reported to be roughly 2.5 times larger than the taxes authorities said the company originally owed. McDonald's lawyers say the settlement is a way of avoiding a long and uncertain legal process and not an admission of guilt. The city is facing a lifeguard shortage, so to help save Chicago's pool season, the Park District is upping the ante in its bid to recruit lifeguards. WTTW News reporter Patty Wetley joins us now with more. Patty, welcome back. Tell us what kind of shortage we're talking about and how this might impact beach and pool season in Chicago.
Right. Well, the beaches opened Memorial Day weekend, and they've managed to get lifeguards onto the lakefront so far. Now the next concern is pool season, and according to some reports in the Sun-Times, there could be as much as a 75% shortage of lifeguards, which will definitely impact the city's nearly 50 outdoor pools in terms of whether they're going to be able to open or not. And this is not a situation unique to Chicago. There is a nationwide shortage of lifeguards for various reasons, whether it's the, employment market being so tight, people weren't able to train to become lifeguards because of coronavirus restrictions, but also certainly Chicago is battling an image issue because of the recent scandal within their aquatics division, specifically tied to harassment and assault within their lifeguard program. So they're facing a number of challenges at the hottest time of the year.
Absolutely. So, Patty, what kind of incentives then is the Park District offering to recruit lifeguards?
Right. They're offering a $600 signing and retention bonus. If you're a Park District employee and you refer a qualified candidate, you can get a $500 bonus. And they're also waiving the residence requirement. So applicants can come from outside the city limits. They just would like to get those pools open and lifeguards staffed.
I'm sure lots of swimmers are hoping that they have some success with those efforts. Patty Wetley, thanks so much.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Patty's full story on our website. That's WTTW.com/news. And now back to Joanna Hernandez, who spent the day in Fuller Park as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. Joanna.
That's right, Brandis. We're now here with Alderman Pat Dowell of the 3rd Ward. Thank you for joining us tonight. Now, first I want to start, we're in this beautiful garden here. You've been here a couple times.
Yes, I've been here many times. This is like an oasis in the middle of the urban jungle, so to speak. I mean, this is peaceful and serene. It's great to just be able to sit back here and hear the birds, talk to people, be calm. And, at a time when the pace of life is so fast.
Were you here? You got to see when this used to be an illegal dumping site?
No, the illegal dumping site predates me. When I come into office, this is the beginning of Eden Place, right? And, I've been here with the children running through, the animals, the different events that Mr. and Mrs. Howard bring to this community every year.
Now, I do need to talk about it. We did mention that this is one of the poorest neighborhoods in Chicago. Now, this neighborhood has been through a lot. We spoke with some residents that they are seeing people coming back into the neighborhood. Are you seeing that?
Yes, you know, I am surprised, Joanna, that I'm getting a lot of requests now for city-owned land to build, housing in Fuller Park. A few years back, that was not the case. But since the pandemic has lifted, people are beginning to express more interest in Fuller Park. We also have a major development it's actually under construction now at 43rd and Wells, which is a car wash and a laundromat, which is very much needed, not just to serve Fuller Park, but the other surrounding communities, and some other commercial spaces coming as well.
That's the goal, right? To bring people back?
That's the goal, to create a better economic base and bring people back to this community, which is a really tight-knit, family-oriented community.
Yeah, you just previously talked about a development. We also seen that there's not many restaurants, not many businesses. You know, what else would you like to see in this neighborhood?
You know, there's not a lot of open land in Fuller Park, so I would like to see some of the vacant city lots and private lots filled with people so we can bring children back to this community. We have a great school in Hendricks Elementary School. Although we're losing a principal, she's done a fantastic job over there. And like I said, we have a new development coming in that's going to bring in some new jobs and retail opportunities for our constituents in Fuller Park.
We actually spoke to that principal. She was also one of our guests here. We caught her right as she had mentioned that she's retiring, and it seems like she made such a huge difference in the community. Do you see that the schools that are here are a staple of the community?
Yes, we lost one school with the closings of the schools. Parkman Elementary is not open now, but Hendricks serves many of the children in Fuller Park. It's a go-to school now. I believe it's level 1. So there's a lot of good gems in this community, and I want people to know that and not just think about Fuller Park as that downtrodden neighborhood west of the Dan Ryan.
I was about to ask you that. What's a couple words to describe Fuller Park?
Close-knit. That's a couple words.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us in this beautiful day.
Thank you. Thanks, Joanna.
All right, and coming up, we speak to a local principal who is now retiring and the work that she's done in her district. But first, I send it back to you.
I love that the alderwoman kept it concise there, Joanna. Close-knit. That's a couple of words. All right, we'll see you in a bit. Thank you. Up next, first there was the storm and then the extreme heat. What's behind it all? Stay with us.
Much of the story of Latinos in America is that of entrepreneurship. About 5 million Latino-owned businesses currently exist in the U.S.
Predominantly Latino communities often bear the environmental burden of heavy industry. Residents of those communities say they have a hard time making their concerns heard.
A Chicago-based photographer has a personal understanding of immigration, and he has spent years documenting small businesses.
The forces of gentrification can make people being priced out of their neighborhoods feel powerless. But the founders of Lolita's Bodega say residents have more power than they think.
The week started off with a tornado in the western suburbs. Then the Chicagoland area was hit with an excessive heat warning. It ended up being our warmest stretch of days in 10 years. Joining us to talk about this week's weather is Scott Collis, an atmospheric scientist and department head at Argonne National Laboratory. Scott, welcome back and thank you for joining us. So let's talk a little bit about the system that caused the tornado that we saw on Monday. Tell us about that.
Well, we're running fairly cool over the weekend. It was a fairly nice start to July, and then we had that really hot air coming through. And when you get that sudden change from cool to hot or hot to cool, really high gradients in time and in space, that's where those thunderstorms like to form. We started off with thunderstorms to our north, mainly hitting up in Madison and Wisconsin, and some down to the south in Indiana. And it actually looked like the Chicago region was going to get off without actually being hit by a storm. But that just gave the area extra time to warm up and become more unstable. And then around 4 o'clock out in Rockford, a kind of thunderstorm formed called a supercell thunderstorm, and that roared towards Chicago, doing a lot of damage as it went.
No, and it looked like at one point, like it was going to head downtown, but it changed course. What made it do that?
That's a really great question. When we have storms of this kind of ferocity, they tend to form their own winds. They tend to suck in air and start to rotate. Now, here in the northern hemisphere, that actually makes them start to take a right-hand turn. Fun fact is, in the southern hemisphere, where storms tend to spin the other way, they tend to take a left-hand turn. So it tended to make it go more towards the south side of Chicago.
What was unusual about this storm? What else was unusual about this storm?
Well, it was particularly ferocious, and it was particularly isolated, small and compact. And because it really kind of went through this path through the western suburbs into the metropolitan region, it really hit a lot of population centers. And the National Weather Service in Romeoville, Chicago, did a damage survey, and they determined that it was an EF0, or enhanced Fujita scale level 0 tornado that touched down in Schaumburg, and it went for 2 miles into Roselle with a swath of damage and 80-mile-per-hour winds.
And you just mentioned damage. What kind of damage did we see from this whole system?
All kinds of damage, from vegetation damage, trees down, fences down. It even delayed the opening of the Brookfield Zoo to 1 p.m. the next day.
Are we seeing more tornadoes in recent years, Scott?
That's a great question. Tornadoes are really small phenomenon compared to the global scale of weather. And the smaller the phenomenon, like storms and tornadoes, the harder it is to either attribute to or rule out attribution to climate change. But there's one thing we know. The kind of storms that produce tornadoes, they like warm, moist air. And all of our climate projections, like those run by the Department of Energy, show that we can expect those ingredients for those supercell thunderstorms to increase in abundance in the Midwest in future years.
Wow. So, of course, there were the storms, but then there was also the heat. We recorded the warmest stretch of days that we've seen in 10 years. What were those temperatures and what were their previous records?
Right, we were well and truly into the 90s. We broke the all-time record for O'Hare Airport yesterday. As you said, it was the warmest stretch we've had in 10 years, but it wasn't just the warmth. It wasn't just those 96 and 98 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. It was the moisture in the air. It was the humidity. When you get warm and moist air like that, it really inhibits the body's ability to cool down by sweat. And while we all got excited about the tornadoes, and thank goodness, so as far as we know, nobody was hurt by them, tornadoes kill on average over the last 30 years about 70 people. The kind of heat we had yesterday and the day before actually kills more like 140 people every year.
And how are the storms, how is the storm and the heat, how are those connected?
So storms love warm, moist air. Storms, the same kind of physics behind a storm is the same kind of physics you can see when you boil a pot of water and you get those bubbles forming and you get that roiling boil. It's because you have warm, moist air down on the surface of the planet where we live and colder air above that you get those turrets, those big boiling storms and the rainstorms, supercells, and occasionally tornadoes.
Okay, and we know it's going to be cool this weekend, but it bounces back next week.
That's right. It's summer in Chicago, and it is particularly warm and notable given that we're in a La Nina year and that we actually had a fairly cool start to the year. So it's made these heat waves feel all the more impactful.
Okay, it's going to be a fun summer. Scott Collis, thanks as always for joining us.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Brandis.
Up next, we check back in with Joanna, who's reporting live tonight from Chicago's Fuller Park community. Stay with us. Now we head back to Fuller Park to check in with Joanna Hernandez, who spent the day there as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. Joanna.
And Brandis, earlier in the day, I spoke with Sandy McDonald, principal at Hendricks Community Academy, and she's now retiring after 15 years at being at that school. I began by asking her about her journey.
I started here as a teacher. Room 103 down this hallway was my classroom. I came back as the area reading coach, and then as the assistant principal and now principal. It's been a very rewarding journey. It's a journey that I have loved and took to heart, and I always strived for excellence here, whenever the work that I did. The community means so much to me, having taught here in this community in the 90s, and so coming back and ending my career here is just very self-fulfilling and rewarding.
So this is basically your second home. You spent many, many years here. What are some things that you could tell me or share that you've worked on here in the school?
I worked on building a culture and climate of learning, a safe, orderly school, making sure that the resources, the materials, the programs, the software, all spoke to my children, making sure that they felt loved and nurtured. I've worked on bringing a highly qualified staff here and making sure that they knew the work that had to happen on 4316 South Princeton. And that work means that we're motivating, we're inspiring, we're nurturing our children at all times because they bring so much and they bring a wealth of knowledge, and we just have to find it and see them. And that's what I just said to my staff. Make sure you see my kids. Make sure you look at them and reach their potential.
Did you say look beyond their neighborhoods?
Yes, look beyond that because they are so smart. They come with so many different personalities and so many different experiences, and we have to make sure as educators that we're tapping into that we're finding their strengths. And so one of the reasons of supporting the school was making sure I'm teaching towards that whole child. So improving the sports program, the music program, the arts program, ensuring that we have computer science here, making sure that we've been one-to-one with technology way before, the pandemic. It was something that I wanted to make sure that there wasn't a digital divide in this school. And so that was my first thing that I've worked on also in providing that type of resource here.
Now I want to talk about how bright this hallway is. It's beautiful, bright colors with so many different pictures and murals. Is there a reason for that?
Well, first of all, yes, I'm big on environment. And the environment had to be an environment when they walked into the school that showed that we cared and loved them. And so making sure that it spoke to that and that it reached them, brightened their day when they walked through this hall. Also, my husband's an artist, and so that's something that's in our house to make sure that there's pictures and colorful bulletin boards and color all around. And that gets deep inside of us. It makes us feel good. And so whatever may be going on into their life, to uplift them and to know, again, when you do this, it shows that you care about the students.
And one last question I want to ask you. You are retiring today. This is your last day today. You're having your retiring party. What do you want to tell the community, the parents, the students, the staff here? I can only imagine it's an emotional day.
It's been a very emotional journey this past couple of weeks. What I said to my kids on Tuesday, I love them. I'll always be thinking about them. I put things in place for them, even after I leave, that should carry on. One of my staff members told me that my DNA is all through the school, and I want to just make sure that they know they're going to be in good hands. They have a highly qualified staff. I couldn't have done it without this amazing staff here in this building. They work very hard, and we're a hidden gem over here in Fulton Park. They don't realize, the school was on probation when I came here. We left in 2019 at a level 1+ school, and so a lot of work, sweat, and tears have gone into this. So I want them to know that the kids will still be well, they will be fine, and just to remember that Mrs. McDonald loves you.
And you can hear the passion in her voice. Again, that was Sandy McDonald from Hendricks Community Academy. Brandis?
And congrats to Sandy McDonald, Joanna, on retiring. Now, before we let you go, I was there 7 years ago in 2015, and it seems like there's been a big effort to revive Fuller Park. What would you say is driving that change?
Brandis, it's the people. I mean, you heard from some of those leaders here. They really want to invest in the community. They believe in the people here. They believe in the young kids. They believe that they could create a change. And you see it. You saw it, that they are making that change. So really, it's the people who are here investing their time.
It always is. The people that make the neighborhood. Joanna Hernandez, thank you so much there in Fuller Park for us. Up next, a new performance chronicling 400 years of Black American history. But first, a look at some events happening around town this weekend. And in Westtown, there is a production at the Vying Theater that's commemorating more than 400 years of Black American history. Here's Angelito with a look.
The struggles that we face are all of America's struggles. And we're in this together. I don't want this show to be a black show. This is an American show.
A local production is celebrating the 400th anniversary of 1619, albeit 3 years later.
1619 is not a traditional play, musical. It's more of like vignettes that take the audience members on a journey through the lives of our ancestors.
What I'm hoping to do is to give context to the struggles that we're facing in this country, to give background, to help people understand that we are a part of a bigger story. And so it behooves us as Americans to find out where we come from and where we're going collectively.
It starts out with the African diaspora, with the enslaved people coming over. And it talks about the first 20 that arrived here in the Americas. And then it moves all the way through where we are now, you know, a little over 400 years later. And despite the pain, there's been a lot of progress. Despite the struggle, there's been a lot of success.
Their skin, beautifully colored by the melanin running through their veins.
And so it really celebrates our movement from being enslaved people to being Americans. And it asks, you know, what does it mean to be an American?
Comprised of 8 original songs, spoken word, and even dance, choreographer and actor Marcello Lee says all mediums are necessary to tell a story only words might not be able to.
It's been the voice for, our voice for 400 years, because when you can speak, you can move. I try my best to combine the styles. What I feel like 400 years we connect with outside of African movement has been jazz, has been modern, has been hip-hop, the evolution of movement.
From racism to colorism to how the U.S. has adapted and everything in between. Playwright and producer Ted Williams says he thought art to be the only way to start these necessary conversations.
We have a nation full of gun violence, a nation full of inequality, a nation full of racism, a nation full of all kinds of destructive things that if we're going to survive as a nation, we have to do the work to do this.
And it's not something that can be healed overnight.
Their financial and psychological subjugation would last for generations.
But this play opens up the door to conversation because it challenges, it also reaffirms, it heals, it creates discussion and dialogue about what it means, and it's going to make some people uncomfortable, but that's okay. It also really, really gives a lot of joy and affirmation to the audience as well.
While the musical looks at past hardships, its primary focus is on a brighter future for everyone.
America is a wonderful, wonderful place in some certain ways. It just has not been extended to everyone. I'm not trying to tear down America. I'm trying to make America work for everyone. And that's what this is about.
Some people are not going to open up a book to read about it, but if they can see it on stage, it'll plant that seed. And art is a way in which you can take a very sensitive subject, put it on stage, and allow people to laugh, cry, allow them to feel what it is that you're trying to convey, and it'll make a difference.
They came on a journey.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
And 1619, The Journey of a People, a musical, opens tomorrow at the Vying Theater and runs through this Sunday only. But don't worry, if you can't make it, there are plans for an encore performance this July. We're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that is our show for this Thursday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night at 7 for the Weekend Review. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe and cool, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.